The Edition Wars. There's always been conflict but amongst D&D gamers and other game system fans about which edition is the best. The edition that I started with is always conveniently the best version for some reason. You could easily blame this on the concept of nostalgia, but I don't think that's it entirely. I think that there's actually something similar going on in terms of what's like happening in people's brains. That's kind of like drug addiction. There is a very old phrase, I believe it emerged out of an opium den culture called chasing the dragon, which is basically to describe that a good chunk of the impetus and drive that people have to continue to abuse certain psychotropic substances is they're less so much trying to maintain a level is that they're trying to get back to the first experience. The first time you do something is it's going to be at its peak. It's most surprising. Your maximum endorphin, dopamine, all that kind of stuff is all at its peak the very first time you're experiencing a new activity or something that alters your mind space, sort of say. And in many ways, even though it doesn't involve narcotics, there is kind of like a mental experience that goes on when role-playing. And so many of the arguments I've seen, like I said, this goes back like way before like the dawn of the internet even. I mean, you go back to, when I was a kid and first got into this stuff, in the 90s, late 80s, like there already were older established gamers who were like well past into adulthood, who are still like really hung up on like, I still got to play my first edition Greyhawk campaign and nothing else, and everything else sucks. Everything that's come after this sucks. Fuck it all, you bunch of fucking bastards. It sucks. How dare you want to replace my first edition Greyhawk? Yeah, kind of a thing going on. This has been with us this whole fucking time, and so like acting like this is some sort of like new internet-born phenomenon. No, it's just easier to see it. It's kind of like, is there a thing going on right now where there's a bunch of like volcanoes erupting around the world, or is it just the normal amount of volcanoes that erupt around the world, but because one made the news a few months ago, now the news wants to report on all of them, which creates this illusion that there's all these fucking extra earthquakes going on out of nowhere, when it's perfectly quite normal. So yeah, though, people, I feel like the real basis for that is because they're locked in on wanting to like recreate this one specific feeling they had the one time, and that's why you kind of like keep being pulled back to that original rules version, because later editions of D&D or whatever game, later versions of Vampire the Masquerade, all that kind of stuff just don't quite get you to where you want to be. And so, hence we get the OSR, somewhat like derivative from my understanding of the whole debacle over 3.5 D&D and the birth of shit like Pathfinder, which then, like gives birth to the open game license, and then eventually people realize, well, wait a minute, I could just recreate those old versions of D&D and really scratch that itch I've been looking to scratch. Except, like everyone's got a slightly different idea of what that is. And so instead of just having like one like solid, consistent OSR that all OSR runs on, there's like what, 50 different core rules, variants of OSR. I mean, like it mostly seems to have boiled down to it's mainly a competition between like, I guess basic fantasy, swords and wizardry, and dungeon crawl classics seem to be like the three that I notice people reference and talk about the most. Almost never actually hear people talk about having run these games, but you do hear people talking about running these games. But, yet they themselves are not perfect recreations of those original versions of D&D. They bring in a bunch of stuff that has crept into the rules over the decades since. The most obvious one being a lot of them do continue to use the modern day ascending armor class instead of the old THAC0 based descending armor class kind of stuff. Uh, but, you know, there's like, you know, if the point is to just, you know, have the old school original experience, and you can get those games in print brand new if you're just willing to wait a couple weeks for them to get printed and delivered to you. 'Cause, I mean, yes, you can't just like go order on Amazon. You can't get a rule cyclopedia and have it in 2 days. You can't get a first edition copy of AD&D and have it to you in a couple of days. But you can still buy them and just have to sit there and wait, pretend you're living 100 years ago and having to buy all your stuff off a Sears catalog and wait for it to get shipped to you out into the boondocks of Wyoming or wherever it is that you are. You know, with your little house on the prairie kind of lives that we all used to have in the quaint past. You just got to exercise just a minimum of fucking patience, and you can have the exact experience that it is that you're actually chasing. You know, having produced an OSR setting myself, just as kind of like an introduction into trying to write my own stuff, I can only like be so negative about the whole culture to a point without it just being like rank hypocrisy. And it is kind of neat to be able to have a back channel way to be able to like write and put out my own D&D setting just by not branding it as D&D. It's OSR, don't you know? But in the end, the reason why I jumped immediately over to just coming up with my own rule system and writing my own stuff based upon that is, I don't know, just as a creative writer kind of point of view, I don't really want to be writing stuff where you have to actively disclaim that this is a tertiary, unofficial product that's never going to be acknowledged or gain any kind of support beyond what I myself am willing to, like, you know, do for it. And I don't know. It's just I don't find that very satisfying, and it's part of why, like, how can the OSR replace D&D? D&D at least has a definitive, marketed, structured. This is the current edition that is canon for use in conventions and, you know, group official tournament type environments and all that kind of stuff. Like the OSR is this 1,000-headed hydra already. Of constant variations, and now is causing bleed back of people feeling like, oh, like, well, now I can just dismantle the rule systems of established D&D games and OSR them myself, which, good God, guys, we've been able to do this whole time anyway, but, you know, like, if you don't like 5th edition because it's not doing something that 3rd edition did, then play 3rd edition. Like, I also, like, it's part of the gambler collector kind of instinct that role-playing games tap into. Like, for some reason, knowing that a game is not going to get any more support, despite the fact that it could have hundreds of source books and pre-published adventures, for some reason that'll just seem to just kind of deflate one's interest in wanting to buy any more of it or use it after having, like, collected a whole bunch of it. And I mean, obviously it's not true of everyone, but I do find that instinct strange in people. So whatever. Feel like, you know, like this ties in a bit with a lot of the conversations about gatekeeping. And, you know, I don't know. You know, part of why I decided to take this chance on taking some time to actually, like, devote to writing, which, I mean, I've been using well. I've written 22 books so far, and I'm working on 23. Only I got a couple chapters left on that one. It's going to be a big, nice, super thick, complete explanation of the magic system for all my Total Party Games titles. You know, just... part of the point of gatekeeping is to let people into the city. And, you know, like, part of why I decided to, like, take this chance to take some time to do this is because I felt there was a window of opportunity where, like, as a complete surprise in my adult life, suddenly role-playing games have made a comeback, and it's a lot easier to self-publish. So there's actually a little window of time where I might actually be able to, like, jump in and maybe gain a little traction and develop an audience, so on and so forth, yada, yada, yada. However, there's a risk that this schizophrenic presentation of things and all this gatekeeping attitude stuff, like, you know, yes, I know the other guys are doing all this stuff that are making you feel like you're being alienated. You feel like you're being gatekeeped. Okay, I get that. Is the solution to do the exact same thing? Is that the Christian thing to do? Whatever happened to turning the other cheek and treating others as you would like to be treated? Whatever happened to being the better person? No, of course not. That's never been the case. We're, two little clusters of primates sitting on opposite hills hurling rocks and feces at each other, and that's all we'll ever be, apparently. We shall see. Perhaps I'm too cynical. Tonight I'm going to be running a basic Dungeons & Dragons adventure. We got a cleric, we got a dwarf, we got an elf. They're going to be doing things in Thyatis, and we'll see how that goes. I figure, could run any number of versions of D&D, but if I'm trying to, go for that old school feeling, then why not use the actual old school rules? We can't tell people that they can't come into the city entirely. The point of a gatekeeper is to allow most of the people who are trying to get in through the gates. You're only trying to scan out a relatively small group of smugglers, criminals, murderers, and ne'er-do-wells to keep them from coming in and causing trouble in your marketplace and or palace or religious shrines. But, if you seal the gates all the time and only allow a few people through, people are going to eventually stop bothering to try to show up. If we allow all this to turn the hobby into something that's uncool again, then all of us, myself included, but a whole lot of other people who've been trying to take this little window of renewed popularity in the hobby to actually try to do a little creative work and earn a little money with it that way, and not just be regular schlobs doing regular jobs. Well, that can all be brought to a complete and total sudden crashing end if people start thinking that this is a bullshit hobby. That's just going to be nothing but, arguing and vitriol. I mean, there's a reason why role-playing games kind of collapsed in the first place, post-2000. Video games were a wonderful alternative. And to this day, I mean, the big reason why I don't like online gaming, having tried it, it's not like I'm saying it without having, at least given it a chance. But, I mean, if I'm going to be playing on a computer by myself, I'd rather just play a regular video game and avoid all the headache and drama, that you get having to deal with, other people and their bullshit. The whole point of the tabletop role-playing game hobby is the tabletop. It's to have the excuse to have some other people in your fucking living room for a few hours and have a structured activity to, base your little fun time around. And then when it's gone, they can get the fuck out. It's an excuse to have some sort of social life. It's a way to meet people who have similar interests and might eventually become friends. All that kind of stuff. It's one of the great ironies that I noticed back in the 90s, and when all of us social outcasts who were into gaming back then were, always treated like, oh, you're so antisocial, Bobby, kind of stuff. And it's like, I have a hobby where I have to actively hang out with people. It's as active, if not more, than people who play touch tag football with other people in their neighborhoods. It's entirely supposed to be a social activity. So do what I do. Cultivate your own players. Try to find people who haven't played before, and then get them to play in your game. That way you can tailor them to your tastes and make sure they play elves the right way. God. Just the ridiculous fucking arguments people are having over all this shit. I mean, on one hand, you got the people trying to say that we gotta, make all orcs into good guys because we don't want people to think orcs are a certain race of human beings as an allegorical stand-in. And then on the other side of the same spectrum, the people who are making fun of people for doing that are also getting themselves up in a twist because people can't play fictional elves alien enough for them. So we all need to chill the fuck out, or we're going to ruin this for all of us. So, on that note, whatever. Stay waspinated.